Will infrastructure expenditure make the future brighter? The 2014 budget speech coverage is brought to you by Old Mutual Corporate.
Hello and welcome to the special coverage of the 2014 budget address of Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan. I'm Nozi Pombandra. Now, joining me to look at the socio-political issues of the 2014 budget presented by Finance Minister Gordhan, I'm joined by Gerhard Papenfus of the National Employers Association, and we'll also be joined by Nick Borain from our Cape Town studios. Perhaps, Gerhard, let me start off with you. I mean, you were sitting with the business a few minutes ago, and I saw that you gave an all-round thumbs up for businesses' reaction to the budget. How do you think the minister fared when it comes to meeting domestic expectations?
Well, first of all, I have a huge amount of respect for the minister, and the way he's presenting his budget is extremely good. But that's more or less where it ends, because you know, the minister started off by saying that in order to address poverty and inequality and all these things, we need to take bold steps.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I don't expect that the minister take the bold steps, because the budget speech is simply a reflection of what's happened, what is government
perhaps achieved in the last 20 years.
Or government policy going forward. But there's no bold steps. The minister has just done a good, moderate budget. And the government's socio-economic philosophy is reflected in that budget speech, and I'm concerned about it. So apart from complimenting the minister for the good job he did by the way he did it, it was extremely professional. Nothing that really excited me, except that the minister didn't increase taxes, and well, that was good news. But apart from that, just a budget. I don't think there was any...
So no wow factor for you?
No, no wow factor at all.
Well, let's look at the fact that elections in South Africa are about 2 months away, that date being the 7th of May in particular. Do you think that this was a good budget for the elections?
Well, I think there was just a certain message that the minister gave. And I don't think people would have picked up, but you know, certain things what was quite fundamental what the minister said. He kicked off by saying that we needed to address inequality, we must increase growth, etc. But he said, and he quoted Oliver Tambo, and he said that where Oliver Tambo in the 1997 said that these actions will be taken on the basis of the Freedom Charter. Now, you know, if you in this day and age still refer to the Freedom Charter as the basis document of going forward, I'm very concerned, because that gives me an indication that we're not going to grow, that we will not eradicate inequality, because this is simply the wrong way to go about. And the fact that the Minister of Finance said that was extremely profound. To bring that into your budget speech is very profound. He's sending out a message, a populist message that says, look, we are still very much linked to the Freedom Charter. That is fundamental and profound. I'm concerned about that, because if we are going to work towards growth, but we'll do that through big government, reigning from the center, interfering in business, we're not going to grow.
Of course, we're going to look at the various elements of social spending, but let's perhaps turn our attention to what the minister had to say about tax as a redistribution of wealth.
Your taxes go up. No. Relax. We don't want any heart attacks here. Personal income tax relief amounts to 9.25 billion rand. So that's what we're giving back to taxpayers to give relief for inflation. About 40% of this relief goes to South Africans earning below 250,000 rands per year. There is no increased tax rate for all of you. An increase in the tax-free lump sum amount paid out for out of retirement funds will increase from 315,000 to 500,000 rands, benefiting especially lower income members who did not benefit from deductible contributions.
Nick, let's bring you into the conversation. Of course, watching the budget speech, the minister was not only speaking to the international investment community, but to the domestic community here at home. In light of the fact that an election is 2 months away, do you think that the minister got the balance right?
Nozipho, hi. Look, I actually think he did. If, for example, this is an election year, the ANC is facing a challenge from the economic freedom fighters that appear to be getting some traction, certainly in areas around Gauteng and in Limpopo and elsewhere. He had a whole lot of options available to him. And if you look at for example, his increases for the social grants, they're very, very low. The tone of the speech backed the NDP to the hilt. This is a document and a policy that's controversial in the ruling alliance. COSATU opposes it. I felt in many ways the Minister of Finance had a profoundly anti-populist message, given where the ANC is, given how close the elections are, whether the budget balances, whether the numbers are credible and legitimate is a more complicated discussion, and how the financial markets will eventually dig that out and they will respond to them in one way or another. But in terms of the politics, the political message, this was a stern, disciplinarian, anti-populist in its presentation anyway.
Nick, on that point, what reaction do you think this budget received from COSATU in particular, and what does this do for the rift that already exists between the ANC and COSATU?
I must tell you, I haven't seen what COSATU's response has been. But if I go on the medium-term budget expenditure framework and previous statements, in the way that he basically, if you look carefully at it, said that the Freedom Charter and the NDP have the same long-term objective there, so they're going the same place. That collapse is going to anger the left. It's going to alienate some on the left, and certainly some within COSATU. But as we know, COSATU itself is quite split along these and around these matters already.
And I'm quite certain that social assistance would also be a contentious issue for the domestic audience. This is what the minister had to say about government support for social assistance in his budget overview.
Spending on social assistance has risen from 75 billion rands in 2008-9 to 118 billion rands this year. The number of grant recipients has increased from 13.1 million in 2009 to 15.8 million today.
Gerhard, we see there that social assistance is up, the number of grant recipients increasing, the minister sharing some numbers there. But also if we think about in 2008-9 budget, we had 75 billion spent on social assistance, and this number's gone up quite a bit to 119 billion. Again, is this the right direction for South Africa to be going in light of the global headwinds that we're seeing?
Well, first of all, I think that the payment of grants is necessary because we're talking about the poor. And I mean, the amounts paid are small, but it's 10% of our total income. You know, out of $1 trillion, it's over 100 billion. You know, it's a huge amount of money. But, you know, while we do it now, it is not sustainable if we're not going to grow the economy sufficiently. Because this is one thing, once you've started doing it, you can never stop doing it. And now they've started, they will have to sustain this thing. And for that, you need a vibrant economy, you need vibrant business, and you especially need vibrant small business. SMME is, we're going to create jobs and take some of those people that we currently pay grants to and bring them into the job market. We will have to create an environment where small business expand. And although the ministers say that we need the private sector, we need small business, well, although they say they are actually doing absolutely nothing to actually create that environment. Nothing, in fact, you know, and this is where I have a problem with what's transpiring here. And I understand the minister's position. This is not the minister that's writing labor laws, for instance. He's doing the budget. But you know, a couple of years ago, I can recall the minister addressing this issue regarding the rules and regulations and legislation that applies to SMMEs. Well, he's now quiet on it because nothing has happened in the meantime, and I think the minister has given up. And as we speak, there are measures currently introduced to make that environment an even more difficult environment to work in. Now, if we're not going to create work, first of all, we're not going to broaden the tax base sufficiently, and we will come up a point where we will not be able to sustain that relatively high social bill.
Welcome back. Continuing our focus on the budget, we still have Gerhard Papenfus and now political analyst Nick Borain, and we're also joined by Ralph Mathekga, Managing Director at Clear Content Research. Ralph, let's look at social spending in particular. We saw the minister talking and addressing the issue of NSFAS and the funding deficit that they've experienced. Again, in light of that, was this an opportunist move for him to just lay calm some of the concerns that we've seen by a much younger voter electorate, or is it really broadly attacking the social issues that are on the table?
Well, if you look at how these elections are building up, how the momentum is gathering up, you realize that younger people are quite a catch for most political parties. And the ANC-led government seems to be having a problem in maintaining a rapport with younger people. We have seen what is happening at various colleges, and that is where the seed of discontent seems to be. And for the minister to respond the way he did, certainly it's an opportunity for him, for his government, to show that indeed they do care about the younger people. Although you look at the timing and then the intensity of intervention at this point, clearly is playing into the gallery of what is going on at the grassroots level and how younger people are being affected.
Well, this is what the minister had to say about government support for education in his budget overview.
We've also made strides in improving access to education over the past 5 years. In 2007, 5 million learners had access to free education. This year, the number increased to 8.8 million. Grade R enrollment has increased from 544,000 in 2009 to 779,000 this year. The National School Nutrition Program now feeds 8.7 million children in our country. The Funza Lushaka bursary scheme supported 3,950 graduates qualifying for placement as teachers in 2013. Through the National Education Collaboration Trust, government, business, labor, and civil society will pool resources and work together to restore schools and improve education outcomes in the period ahead. The allocation to the National Student Financial Aid Scheme increases from 5.1 billion last year to 6.6 billion in 2016-17. I know Minister Nzibande wants a bit more, but we're working on it. This will increase the number of FET college bursaries to 292,000 and will assist over 236,000 students to attend university by 2016-17.
Nick, we see there the minister, of course, recounting and reflecting on the socio-economic achievements, especially in the education space, that the current administration has achieved. Going forward, and again, putting the spotlight on the election, do you think he got the balance right in terms of what he will be spending on the socio-economic factors that he needs to consider?
If you're thinking of the budget speech purely as its impact on how people are going to vote, I think you're going to miss something important, because what's important for us about the budget is those who buy our bonds and our currency and lend us money, whether they believe it's going to balance. Are his figures believable? Is his social spending figures payable with the kind of revenue projections? Is the rate of growth going to generate that kind of revenue? And I think there is where some of this budget starts breaking down. I think it was a great political performance. I think it was a very careful balance in an election year. He had to play up the ANC's successes over the last 20 years and give hope for the future. But the real problems, I think, come in when you look, for example, at the public sector wage bill. He didn't mention that at all. You have to dig into the budget review for that. And he's given space there. This is 39% of non-interest government spending. It's a huge part of what government spends. And he's given space there to break out of the promises he's made at the rate that that will increase. He'll say, look, it really depends on inflation and on the value of that expenditure when we come to make it. So he's given himself an upside when they do the public sector wage negotiation next year to go over what he's promised investors in, i.e. people who lend us money, what he's promised them. And that for me is a more important issue.
Of course, let me come back to you, Gerhard. We hear Nick speaking about investors that obviously borrow money to South Africa, which are a very important constituency in this particular conversation. But ordinary South Africans are looking for the number that he's going to give for employment creation. And again, we see that magic 6 million job opportunities. But in line with that, he talks about a job fund where there's going to be collaboration with the private sector. Are you buying that story that given the fact that we're seeing 2.7 economic growth, or that's what the projected figure is, that 6 million is really going to be a target that's achievable?
You know, the problem I have is it remains a fundamental problem in that government cannot create jobs. They can you know, when they talk about the number of jobs they did today, they did not create jobs. They were perhaps referring to public works project. No, that is not, you know, that's not a job.
So you're not convinced by the jobs fund that they say that they're going to put in place together with private sector to drive these numbers?
Well, what government will stop doing is to throw money after these things. The only sustainable kind of work which there is when a private firm employ somebody because there's a need for that person to be employed. That's the only. The other way around, this is throwing money after it. Now, it might help when it's a temporary thing, but unless you create an environment where business get confidence in the market, start planning, start investing for a future because they believe in that future, we're not going to create work, because any other way, if you have a job fund, you're taking money from X and pay to Y to employ somebody. You can't do that. We must create work, and that's private sector employment is the only way that we're really going to employ. Now, I think we're there to some extent at a stalemate. We're not, you know, unemployment is down by point-something%, and that's good. But we haven't really made inroads, and we're talking about how many students is now in grade R. I think he talked about 700,000, what did he say? Now, remember, in 12 years' time, these guys will go into the market. Yeah. We're talking about 500,000 plus people coming into the employment market, and we must create a base where these people can be accommodated.
Let me jump in very quickly. We've got less than 30 seconds together. Yeah. Do you take any comfort in some of the measures, the tax incentives and tax breaks and policy that he talks about to empower small and medium-sized enterprises? Because that's where the jobs are supposed to come from.
You know, again, it's a fundamental thing. Untie the hands of the private sector, the small business people, and tie their hands and don't stop throwing money after it.
Okay, let me hold you on that one. Let's jump to Labour before we run out of time. Ralph, let me bring you on the Labour front. The only point, and I might have missed something, where the minister spoke about the Labour issues was when you were speaking to our challenges to meeting our economic growth targets. Do you think this was a missed opportunity, given the fact that Labour unrest is literally holding the platinum sector at ransom?
I think that he should have gone a little bit harder on Labour, because if you look at what's happening, the environment is such that investors just don't have confidence. I mean, if you have 20 billion rands you want to throw into South Africa's mind, you have to ask yourself so many questions. There is also no sense of policy stability as we are going into this election. Nobody really knows how the turnout of elections are going to affect even the policies within even the mining sector. But I think that government need to show much more firm hands. They need to retain that control, or maybe the relationship that they used to have with Labour, in a way that it could create a stable environment. They can spend as much as they can, but without a viable environment, it's just going to be wasted.
Nick, let me come to you for your final comments, and perhaps you can also touch on the way the minister has chosen to allocate funding for service delivery measures. We see national government 48%, provincial 43%, and the heart of service delivery gets 9%. Your reaction to that?
I think he's given the money to those who can spend it most effectively. I think there's an instinctive thing coming through this government, through the ANC from the start, of more trust in the centre and less trust on the peripheries. And I think that it's not surprising to me that the lion's share of expenditure is going to come from the centre.
Well, I've got less than a minute to go, and I quickly want to tap into the rumour mill. Let's talk about Tito Mboweni, who has, and Nick, let me bring this to you first. Tito, of course, has been fingered as the gentleman to likely succeed Pravin Gordhan. We saw him resigning from the Anglo-Ashanti board earlier last week. Your reaction to that? Is Tito the man for the job?
I was looking so carefully today when the minister said goodbye and thank you. And I might have been reading into it, but it sounded like goodbye to me. And certainly on Twitter, and I follow Tito Mboweni on Twitter, it sounds like he's been asked at least. I can't tell for sure. Would the financial markets mind? I think they'll be fine with Tito. But it's a question that relates to a question you said much earlier. Tito wrote our labour legislation. He was the first Minister of Labour. You might remember that.